Now, even though we're unsure which teams will be doubling in Game Week 25, I've got you covered with the ultimate transfer targets, and we're also going to be discussing whether or not it is worth activating that assistant manager chip if you haven't already. Now, before we dive into today's video, of course, if you do enjoy any of the content that you see on the channel, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, as we are trying to hit 12,500 subscribers by the end of the season, and it is only possible with your guys' some amazing support. Now, Game Week 25 might be the next week in FPL, however, there is still so much that can change over the next 5 to 6 days. Of course, all the double Game Week 25 games are based off what will happen in the EFL Cup semi-finals this week, played on Wednesday and on Thursday. So here are the kind of parameters for the change. So if Liverpool get to the final, they come from that 1-0 down in the first leg to Spurs. If they get to the final, then them and Aston Villa will double. So that would mean Aston Villa would have a double of Ipswich and Liverpool. And then it would mean Liverpool again would have back-to-back double game weeks and would have Wolves and Aston Villa. If Spurs were to hold on to their 1-0 lead, or of course add on to that, then they progress to the final. They of course then would double in 25 and would face off against Fulham, meaning that they would have a double game week of Manchester United and Fulham. Not the best double, but still it's a double game week. And then Fulham would have Nottingham Forest and Tottenham at home. Some definite assistant manager potential there if Fulham were to progress with Marco Silva. Of course, they'd have table bonus against Nottingham Forest, and you would feel probably quite confident that they could get something in both of those games with them being at home. And then the final one, which of course is the most impossible, and nearly said two words and combined them then, is if Arsenal were to make it to the final. Of course, they are 2-0 down, heading to St James's Park. However, with a lacklustre performance today, is something that probably shouldn't be ruled out. So they could still get there. Of course, then they would face Leicester and Chelsea as their double, and then Chelsea would have Brighton and Arsenal. So no bad doubles for those two sides. However, it is more of a kind of unlikely scenario, so I haven't included either Arsenal or Chelsea players within today's video. Of course, if they do progress on Wednesday and Thursday and we get a better picture of that double game week, then of course we will update our transfer targets. But for now, with that being the most unlikely, I haven't included any of their players in today's video. So we are going to cover Liverpool, Villa, Spurs and Fulham, as that is the most likely double for next game week. Before we head into the players, let's take a look at the assistant manager chip points from 11FI. Now, this does include game week 24, so just ignore that column, and let's look to 25 and 26, because I feel like some people, if they've gone for the TC Salah this week, of course, with another double game week, it makes complete sense to be activating that assistant manager chip. I feel like here you've probably got three choices. You could go for Arnie Slot if you've still got that third Liverpool slot available, with him having 15.3 projected points. Fulham, like I said, could be a really interesting proposition. I think that advantage of maybe having the table bonus against Nottingham Forest could also be one of the big incentives that of course makes you go for that one. Or you could go for Aston Villa. Now again, they could have the potential opportunity of a table bonus if they were to face off against Liverpool. However, their first game would be against Ipswich, and you do feel like they could rack up quite a few points if they went and obviously demolished Ipswich in that game. So that's something to consider. So those are probably going to be the three managers you're going to be looking at if you were to activate the chip this week. Unai Emery, Marco Silva and Arnie Slot are probably going to be three examples, of course, depending on who progresses yet again. Let's move on then to some data from 11FI. Taking a look over the next 5 game weeks for projected clean sheets and projected goals. Of course, these do not include the projections for the double game week for 25 because we don't know which teams are going to be doubling. Looking at this though, if Arsenal were to get that double, I definitely think going for double Arsenal defence would be a fantastic use of your free transfers. Of course, as you can see here, already a 52% chance of that. You add in that Chelsea game as well. You've got decent fixtures for the next few as well, following on from that 26, 27, 28 and match day 29 as well. The likes of Gabriel, Raya, Timber, Saliba, that could be absolutely ideal and could be monstrous with those projected clean sheet numbers if they were to, of course, overcome that 2-0 deficit, get the double game week. That potentially could be a strategy there. Liverpool as well, obviously if you've still got another Liverpool slot available and you're not thinking about playing it on slot, or maybe you couldn't get to slot, you've gone for the Moyes and then that route, then of course Liverpool have decent projections for this week. They do tail off a little bit afterwards, but still not a bad hold to probably game week 30 if you're planning on that wild card. card. Everton's are pretty okay across the board, so of course if you did go for Mikalenko or Pickford this week, it's not the end of the world. They've still got some pretty decent projections coming up over the next few weeks. Chelsea, if they were to get the double as well, could be an interesting proposition because you'd have the game for 25. Then, of course, as you can see, 27 and 28 are their strong fixtures. So again, could be decent players to hold a little bit more longer term as well. In terms of other teams, Fulham, 35% already. Again, if they get that double with Spurs, could also be further kind of motivation to potentially have one of their defenders in, Anthony Robertson, or you've got completely on the other end of the spectrum, Anderson as well within the cheaper bracket. We're also seeing a decent run coming up for Bournemouth. However, with no double game week in 25, I would be suggesting using my transfers to bring in their players rather than, of course, looking towards, just single game week players. Villa as well with another opportunity to get a double in 25. Already 41% chance of a clean sheet. So again, could be worthwhile investment if they do get that double game week as well. We're also starting to see a little bit of a drop off in terms of Newcastle. So I would suggest probably, the likes of Lewis Hall, Dan Burn, maybe you've got the goalkeeper as well, starting to potentially shift away from them and look to either double game week players or players with decent fixtures over the next few weeks. Of course, the likes of, Bournemouth with their good run coming up as well. Forest are really not fancied on the 11-5 model, and they do have some really difficult fixtures. However, throughout the course of this season, it does seem one that the model is struggling to kind of get to grips with because Forest are just massively overperforming their underlying data every single week. So it's really, really struggling to kind of predict where Forest are going to be in a few weeks. I still think I probably would maybe hold some of my Forest players just because they continually get the points every single week, continue to impress. And I just feel like they're on one of those runs where if you don't have them, it's going to be painful. And just sticking with them, despite the data not being there, it just seems like they're on one of those runs this season and kind of a little bit inevitable at times. But maybe that could change in the next few weeks with some more difficult fixtures on the horizon after Brighton. However, still some great fixtures coming up. Let's move on then to look at the projected goal numbers from 11-5. Liverpool, as you can see, already great data going into match day 25. You factor in another game against Aston Villa there again. People that, have Salah, have, of course, Cody Gakpo. They're going to be licking their lips looking at these numbers as well. Pretty decent numbers over the next few weeks to go with that. Of course, maybe if you've still got that triple captainship left, maybe you were a little bit kind of, you didn't want to play the assistant manager. You wanted to wait for Liverpool to potentially get this double game week. I think if you've got it, play your triple captainship. Assistant manager probably going to be 36 to 38 for you in terms of that strategy as well. We can see both Chelsea and Arsenal are up there as well, so could be worthwhile if they somehow get that double game week on, especially with Chelsea's decent fixtures, 27 and 28. But like I said, that is the least probable outcome of them all. I think it's around 10% for that to happen, so it's really, really low outcomes for, of course, Arsenal to overturn that. But still, let's wait and see. Stranger things have happened in world football. We're seeing some decent numbers as well for Spurs on this list, and again, if they get that double game week, could be really, really advantageous. Bournemouth as well, some great numbers across the board, so the likes of Kluivert, you have Otaro as well, Taverniers now back as well. You've got plenty of decent options to potentially be looking at over the next few weeks. Villa's 25 as well is also decent. You factor in another double game week there, that could be another great fixture as well. Same goes for Fulham. Their numbers aren't too bad across the board, so definitely worth some sort of consideration. Of course, if you did go for Ndiaye this week, probably going to be a transfer out in the next few weeks as well, with some difficult underlying data going forward. Now, I know the 11-5 data is suggesting here that Nottingham Forest and Chris Wood are probably going to have a little bit of a fall off with their poor data here. However, I would keep them. I genuinely would. Off the back of that performance today, I'd keep them for one more week, then kind of assess the situation you're in, maybe see what other players are kind of doing. But for right now, I probably would be recommending that you do keep the likes of Chris Wood. That was the data side, and of course, looking at the double game weeks in 25. Now let's move on to some players. Now here is my ultimate grid for the double game weeks. Like I said, I've excluded Chelsea and Arsenal for now. Of course, if those two were to get the double game week, we'll add them to this mega list that we've got going off here. But like I said, we're going with the kind of more probable potential double game weeks on the card. So we've got the Liverpool players, we've got the Villa players, we've got the Fulham, and we've got the Spurs down the bottom. Now, of course, there are other players that are missing from this list. However, I have gone for the players that I feel personally are going to be some of the best investments in this week. If there's a player that's not on here doesn't mean that they're not a bad option, just means for me that personally I probably wouldn't be selecting them. But if you've got a gut feeling and you want to go for it, then be my guest. Of course, I am filming this while the Aston Villa game is on. They're currently 1-0 down, and Rodgers has picked up a yellow. So if he picks up a second yellow and gets suspended, I said absolutely nothing. Let's start off then first with Liverpool. Now, Trent Alexander-Arnold did leave the Liverpool game early, the Bournemouth game, early, with a suspected hamstring injury. There was no players around him. He just pulled up holding his hamstring. However, he did walk off, but yeah, we're going to have to wait and see. Of course, there is a 12-day gap between, of course, the first game in game week 24 and the second. So if he's back for that one, fair enough. Of course, we've got a lot of time to prepare ahead of game week 25, but I do feel he is definitely going to be worth the money. His underlying data is absolutely exceptional. His predicted points, as well as you can see there, pretty much beating everybody to that over those weeks as well. Liverpool's strong projected clean sheet data as well, some of the best in the league from 11FI. You also factor in the fact that they're one of the best teams for XG conceded in the league, and he gets himself into some really, really decent positions. If fit and available, Trent is going to be one of my favourite Liverpool players to pick up over Van Dijk and Konate, but I've left those two on there. Of course, if Trent is out injured, maybe you wanted to keep that Liverpool kind of back line in there. Of course, like I said, with the strong defensive data, my pick personally would be Konate. There isn't too much difference between him and Virgil van Dijk. However, the price is monstrous between the two. So, of course, I would be recommending that you do, of course, go and pick Konate up rather than going for Virgil van Dijk, in my personal opinion. I just don't think he offers anything that justifies that 6.4 million price tag. Yes, he plays for one of the best defences in the league. However, when you can get a defender like Konate for a lot cheaper that actually has better expected goal involvements and more goal involvements this season, then why would you not do that? Finally, it is going to be Cody Gakpo. It does look like that left-hand side is his. However, we have seen now early substitutions for him in back-to-back Premier League weeks, and that is a little bit concerning, of course. His underlying data isn't too bad, and his predicted points as well aren't too bad, and he is a player that is consistently doing exceptionally well. However, I'm really interested to see how his minutes are managed within the next few weeks. I do think, you know, maybe these early substitutions that Slot has seen probably is going to mean that he is going to be in good stead to feature in both games in game week 25, and I definitely think if you do have one of those spare Liverpool slots available, I still think the assistant managership would be better use of them rather than, of course, using that third Liverpool slot. However, if you do, you know, fancy going for a Gakpo or a Trent, or maybe if Trent's injured and you want to switch things up and move around, then I probably would go for Gakpo. But like I said, Trent, Gakpo, they're my two favourites. Of course, if Trent is injured, then Konate probably would take that mantle. In terms of Aston Villa, like I said, their game is currently on now, so if any of the players pick up injuries or suspensions, then please do ignore me. We've got two defensive picks, and I do think that Digne is probably going to be the better out of the two, considering his more goal involvements, better XGI, and better predicted points. I think you might as well take that gamble for 0.2 million. Yes, his minutes are a little bit more dicey than Ezri Konsa. However, I do think for me personally, I probably would just take that gamble if I was bringing them in for the double game week. Hope that he potentially could get an attacking return out of that Ipswich game. For 0.2 million, I just think it could be worth the gamble. Of course, though, he does have a notorious reputation as being one of the FPL trolls. But for me personally, slightly better chance of an attacking return for 0.2 million. Why are you not going for that one? It does seem a little bit simple. Next up is going to be Ollie Watkins. He's definitely going to be on a lot of people's radars. Of course, with Alexander Isak blanking, then of course them facing City. So if Aston Villa were to get the double game week against Ipswich, who have been absolutely woeful since the turn of 2025 as well, you would be thinking that Villa could be feasting that one. He's also gone and got himself a Premier League hat-trick at Anfield before, and I definitely think he could cause that Liverpool defence a few issues. Of course, John Duran has now left the club, which does mean that he's the only solo striker. Of course, though, there could be shakes and moves with the deadline for the transfer window not coming till Monday, so that potentially could decrease his value. However, I do still believe he is going to be the starting striker for Aston Villa at the moment. As you can see, his goal involvements are decent. His underlying data as well is pretty decent. However, that miss in midweek of his penalty potentially could mean that he gets taken off them. They could switch to potentially John McGinn Or they could switch to the guy below, Morgan Rogers. He takes them for England's under 21s, I want to say. Hopefully that's the right age group. But I know he definitely takes them for some sort of England age group. Has a pretty decent pen record as well. Of course, with Watkins now missing two in his last two penalties as well that he has taken for Aston Villa since Douglas Luiz has left the club, then I definitely think that does open the door. Like I said, he is on a yellow card at the time of me recording this, so if he does pick up a second yellow, that would be disastrous. But I think in that budget bracket, he outshines both Kluivert, Taro, all those cheap midfielders, Ahmed this week, if he does get that double game week as well. Potential for penalties. Genuinely, there is that slight potential that, of course, he now is Villa's penalty taker with Watkins missing another in the Champions League. But it's still not been confirmed. We need to wait and see what happens when they next get a penalty. But for me, the Villa boys, definitely going to be worth some strong investments if they do get a double game week. The Liverpool fixture isn't ideal, but that Ipswich one could be a right little feast session. Next up is going to be Fulham. And yeah, I think for Fulham, it's a little bit more tricky to kind of pick their players, because Forest and Tottenham is two games on paper that I don't really know how to call, because Forest, prior to them obviously going and smashing Brighton 7-0, I would have said, yep, comfortably, Fulham probably will win that game. Now I'm a little bit unsure, but then Fulham have gone and put in a strong performance against Newcastle at St James's Park as well, so they've definitely got that capability, and they are, you know, one of those sides that can definitely upset teams this season. Of course, I think if I was to go for any Fulham player or any sort of Fulham asset, it would be Marco Silva with that table bonus. I do feel like that is going to be a bigger advantage rather than, of course, going for any of these Fulham players. I think Robinson somehow is keeping just jam assists every single week. As you can see, he's actually got the same goal involvement per 90 as Luca Digne, but 6 more attacking returns. I think that speaks volumes about his jam, and also the Fantasy Football Hub model as well is not rating him too highly in terms of those predicted points. Not really too much of a discrepancy between him and Anderson. I think Anderson's a decent option with his price point as well. He could open a lot of doors up. Of course, maybe if you're looking for a way to potentially go and get other more expensive players in, maybe Son, if that doubles, of course, on for Spurs. Of course, maybe it might allow you to get Slot in. There's lots of other options as well, isn't there, that Anderson potentially could open up for you. If I was going to have Moyes in game week 24, of course, then my route to go and get one of Silva or Emery would have been Anderson at 4.2. Pretty decent. Playing 90 minutes consistently could be a great little bargain buy. In terms of Iwobi, I probably would prefer, if you know, Rodgers got the double, probably would prefer that. And if he doesn't, yeah, I just can't get behind the Alex Iwobi one. I don't really see the data being there. I'm not overly hyped by it. His minutes as well are pretty sporadic. Same goes with Raul Jimenez. He could be worth a punt, of course, if you went for Ndai this week. I think if you got Ndai, the punt then would be to go to Raul, of course, if they get the double. Or, of course, if you've maybe got João Pedro and you're absolutely fed up of him, Raul Jimenez could be a fantastic little buy. I do like him if Fulham get the double game week. I probably prefer him over Anderson, Robinson and Iwobi in my personal opinion. If they get that double, Raul Jimenez probably is going to be the pick. If you've gone for Ndai, maybe you've got João Pedro still kicking about. At 5.6, he could be a decent option. Looks like the starting striker. Of course, though, Muniz did come off the bench today and score, and he is always around lurking. But I do feel like Raul probably will start both of the games for me personally. Finishing up, it is going to be Spurs, and yeah, I really couldn't get hyped if it was Spurs Fulham that had the double game week, to be honest. The problem with it is Spurs look abysmal at the moment. Of course, they're absolutely plagued with injuries. The only player that's kind of impressed me this season has been Kulusevski. 6.4, not bad. They follow that up with Ipswich as well. But he doesn't seem like somebody that could go and get an absolute mega haul, if you know what I mean. So, again, I'm not really hyped if it was to be Spurs Fulham that would get the double game week. And I think Kulusevski would be a decent pick, but again, can he get those mega scores? I don't really think so. The advantage probably with this is they do get that Ipswich fixture in 26. Son is someone that is capable of getting those double-digit hauls. Of course, penalty appeal as well with him. However, the problem is going to be that price tag and how do you get him in? Of course, if Liverpool weren't to double, I think maybe you could downgrade a Trent Alexander-Arnold if you had him to a cheaper defender. Maybe somebody like an Anderson if that was the way that the double was going to go to get yourself a Son in. I don't mind that. Son could also be a decent captaincy option if you wanted to go down that route. You'd follow it up with Ipswich away as well, which is a pretty nice fixture. and also has a pretty decent record against Manchester City as well. So not too bad. And then the final player is going to be Van de Ven, coming back from injury. Cheap defender if you wanted to go down that route. However, Spurs have been pretty woeful in terms of their expected goals conceded, so I probably would not go down that route. That concludes, of course, the players that have the potential double game week in game week 25. Let me know what you think of that table. Of course, we can do more of these if you want to see them in the future. Let's move on then to some non-double game week players that people might potentially be looking at, and it is going to be Kluivert and it is going to be Kerkez. I know that Bournemouth have a decent plethora of those cheap midfield options. We spoke about Dango in previous videos. Of course, Semenyo as well looked very, very bright in the Liverpool game. However, my two favourite personal Bournemouth assets are going to be Justin Kluivert. I think with the penalty appeal, that obviously sways him for me over the other two. Of course, as well, some of the Premier League hat-tricks that he's been getting this season as well. Does seem like a man who is capable of course, getting the double-digit hauls over the likes of somebody, say, like a what's his name, like a Semenyo, who's been a little bit of a troll this season, hasn't he, with his attacking returns. I thought he was bright. He had an open net, missed as well today. If he puts that in, he's on a lot more people's radars heading into this week against Southampton, Wolves and Brighton. Ideally, though, I would be suggesting to you guys to go and pick up a double game week player. However, if he does enable you to go and get a double game week player because of his cheap price point, then I'm all for it. Of course, maybe if that the Fulham Tottenham one, I probably would still go for the double game week players, but it would be a hard call when Kluivert does have a decent run and Southampton in, of course, 25. I also like Kerkez as an option. Decent fixtures. Always seems to be one of the players that is, of course, passing the eye test for me. Getting into the right positions. I know his data's not looking exceptional with only one shot in the box, and he scored off that one goal with a 0.05 XG, but he is somebody for me personally that just passes the eye test a little bit more. Of course, they do have Huijsen in that budget position as well if you are looking for a cheap defender heading into this game week to free up some price. Let's move on to then our final section. It is going to be the predicted points for the next 5 game weeks. No real shock that Mohamed Salah is on this list with the potential double game week. Cole Palmer could be a really interesting player to hold on to for the next few weeks as well. If Chelsea manage to get a double game week next week, follow that with the fixtures in 28 and 27 for Chelsea that we saw on the 11-5 data with really, really strong projected numbers. He could be one of those players that you might potentially regret selling. I know he's eaten up a lot of budget. I know he's really disappointed the past few weeks. However, could be a decent one to hold on to. We're also seeing Son up there. Of course, that's probably going to be because of the double game week, obviously elevating him. Same with Watkins as well. I really, really like him as a pick. And Mbeumo and Vissa could also be decent shouts. Again, they don't have the double game week this week. If they did, they'd be on a lot more people's radars. But again, probably going to be two players that over the next few weeks, once we get around this double game week hype, are definitely going to be on quite a few people's radars for me personally. That is going to conclude today's video. Let me know what you think of it down in the comment section below. Of course, if you've got any questions about your team as well, get them in the comments as we'll try to answer as many as we possibly can. But thank you very much for watching today, ladies and gentlemen, and good luck in double game week 25.